everybody doing today? Spring is starting today, just in case you're wondering. It's just going to get warmer from here. We're just ready for it. I'm excited. If I have not met you yet, my name is Austin, and I'm the pastor here, and just thrilled that you're here today as we wrap up Esther. And so we're excited what we've been doing over these past few weeks, really been seeing how God has been moving, and we're just excited to wrap that up today. But before we jump into that, I want to let you know that next week, we're going to be doing a one-off message. We're calling it Seas and Streets. And so we have had some different relationships with things where we can have opportunities to love people across the streets and across the seas. And so next week we're going to focus pretty heavily on across the seas. And so we have an alliance with the country of Haiti, and more specifically Mission Haiti. And so we are going to be having the executive director of Mission Haiti come, and he's going to be with us next week as a guest speaker. And so we're excited for that, for him to be able to come and to share what's going on in Haiti. He was there just a couple of weeks ago. And so the last couple of years with COVID, there's been a little bit of a challenge. We haven't been able to go on trips and haven't been able to get down there as much as we would like. And so he is going to come, and we're going to be getting it back up and running. And so you're not going to want to miss it. It's going to be a great opportunity for us to hear about what's happening in Haiti and the ways that we're going to be able to support them. And we're hoping that trips are going to be able to get started again. And so I'm excited about that. I have been. And all y'all got to go. It's amazing to be able to go. And so excited about what he's going to share next week. So make sure that you are here next Sunday. And then Easter starts that next week. So it's Palm Sunday, and then we've got Good Friday services, and then Easter on the 9th. You're not going to want to miss any of that. So just plan on being at church every week for the foreseeable future. Just pencil it in and just make sure that you're here. You're not going to want to miss it. It is going to be great. So hope that you're here. And then for Mission Haiti, they're also going to bring some Haitian snacks. And so if you're missing your Haitian snack fix, you can come next week, and we will have that for you as well. But I am super pumped about that, and I'm excited to be able to really partner with Haiti and see what God is going to do in and through that relationship. So make sure that you're here for it so that you don't miss it. But today, we are going to be wrapping up Esther, and it has been a journey, hasn't it? We have been on this journey walking through the 10 chapters of the book of Esther, and we have looked at all kinds of different things. And so if you have missed any of the weeks, it is a story that has been building on itself. It's like any other movie. It'd be like if you were here for the very first time today, I'd encourage you to go back and listen to the other ones, because if you only listen to this one, basically you're going to see the closing scene and the credits. That's basically, if this was a movie, that's what you would be seeing. And so make sure that you go back and see the rest of the story. It has been incredible to walk through that, but you can go and see that online anytime. All of our messages are available at that link, so feel free to go and check that out. But if you haven't been with us, I'm going to give you just a little snippet of where we've been these first 4 weeks before we jump in to today. And so before I even get into that, I want you to know that throughout this series, my hope is that you have been reading your Bible. Maybe it's just by grabbing this, and if you haven't grabbed one yet, there's a couple left out in the basket. Feel free to grab one. But I'm just hoping that we would be reading our Bible, maybe for the very first time. I've heard some people, I've talked to some people, it's like, I never read the Bible before, and like, I can't believe this stuff is in there. Like, I can't believe this story is in there, and I can't believe that this is what is actually inside of the Bible. I just thought that all of the stuff inside of the Bible was like 2,000 years ago, like mumbo jumbo, really old, like what does it even matter? But like, there's real people doing real things, and God is moving. And so our hope is that whether it's your first time reading the Bible, or maybe you've just reignited a love for reading God's word, that has happened throughout this series. And so feel free to grab one of those, grab one for a friend, whatever you'd like to do. But these last 5 weeks, we have been in all over the book of Esther, and so we left off last week at chapter 7. And so we're going to pick up and finish up the book today, but I want to just give a quick recap. And we look at this idea that Esther has been left in this moment for such a time as this. We have kind of known that was kind of what the entire book revolved around. But we begin the book with a guy named King Xerxes. And so he is the king of the Persian Empire, which is the largest empire that has ever existed in recorded history. The largest empire that's ever, and we learn that he likes to party, okay? He is like the first ever party boy, and he loves to throw banquets and huge parties for people, and in a drunken stupor, he banishes his wife at the very beginning, and then he puts on a beauty pageant to find the new king, as he says it, a better queen for his kingdom. And so there is this pageant that goes out to find the most beautiful women in all of Persia, and Esther, the name of our story, is one of the gals who comes and is a part of that. And she is excellent. And she is awesome, and she ends up being the most beautiful, the most favored, the most excellent, the one that the king accepts as his new queen. And she rises up to power, and she's awesome, and she has great character, and she's very strategic, and she does what she's supposed to do so that God can use her for such a time as this. Inside of the story, we also learn that Esther has been orphaned. And so she is an orphan, and she also has been adopted by her cousin. His name is Mordecai. And then there's a villain in the story. His name is Haman, and he is the worst, okay? He is awful. He's an egotistical maniac. He's a narcissist. He is a control freak. He is all the things that we don't want to be in our lives. But Haman absolutely hates Esther's adopted dad and cousin, Mordecai. And so he puts together a scheme to kill Mordecai and decides that he wants to put out a law, an edict out into all of Persia to be able to eradicate and kill all of the Jewish people. So he's kind of a little bit vengeful. He doesn't just want to kill Mordecai. He wants to kill all of Mordecai's people because he hates the Jews because of a long-standing culture war that they have been in. Well, get this, Haman hates him so much that he decides that he's not just going to kill Mordecai, that he's going to try and kill him a little earlier than the law says that he can. And so he builds a huge pole in his backyard to impale Mordecai on it, and he ends up getting impaled on it himself. It's like the craziest thing ever. It's amazing to watch it and read it. It's insane. Not amazing in watching him get killed. Come on, it's okay. You know where I'm at, right? Okay. It was amazing to see just the flip of the script, to see the great reversal begin. And so we pick up this story today as Mordecai has told Esther to go before the king and to fend for the lives of her and her Jewish people. And so she goes before him, and he grants that wish. But that's just like the beginning of the story. See, the law is still in place. The Jewish people are still to be killed on this 13th day of the 12th month of the year. That's still out there. And she has asked the king to save her and to save her people. And so she invites the king and Haman to a party, and then they get all into it, and it's crazy, and then Haman ends up getting killed at the end of that party. And so we find here in chapter 8, verse 1, we see the king in his anger and in his rage. What is he going to do? And so it says this: that same day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. The king took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai, and Esther appointed him over Haman's estate. And so we keep seeing this phrase, the signet ring. And this signet ring is the way that King Xerxes is to be able to put into law anything that he wants to. And so, like, if you've seen like an older time letter where they would use wax, where they would close the envelope and then they would drip some wax on it, and then they put a stamp on it with the crest of the family. If anybody's seen anything like that, that is basically what the signet ring is. It is the press that you would press into wax to say this is who it's coming from. And so the king's ring would be pressed into wax and say, this is what the king wants. And so Haman put into law the eradication, the destruction of the Jews, with which a law that he used, and he used the king's signet ring to sign that into law. And so the king, now he has killed Haman because Haman tried to kill his queen and all the Jewish people. He has reclaimed that signet ring from Haman, and now it says that he has given it to Mordecai. Mordecai is rolling over in his grave, or he's grumbling on the pole, wherever he's at in this story. He is mad about this. I can't imagine how he would feel about the fact that all of his power has been given over to Mordecai. That ring signifies all of the king's authority. And all of it used to be Haman's, and now it belongs to Mordecai. Second thing that we see in this section is that the estate of Haman. Haman had a little bit of money. He had some things going on. He had uber amounts of money, and he had all the authority and all of the influence. And now what we see is that Haman's power and influence has now been handed to Mordecai. And not only has his power and influence been handed to Mordecai, but also his estate. All of his money, everything that he has been given over to Mordecai as well. But as you read in the story, it says that the king took off the signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai, and Esther appointed him over Haman's estate. And so going back a little bit of historical knowledge for you is that it was impossible for the king to give something to a Jewish man. And so it was natural in historical context for the king to give the estate to the queen, and then she would appoint Mordecai to oversee the estate. And so he would live there, and he would oversee it, and he would take care of it, but it did not belong to Mordecai. He just simply oversaw it. He was the executor of the estate. But it's crazy to look at this reversal as it continues ongoing, that everything that Haman had is now being given to Mordecai, his archenemy. His estate, his wealth has been given to Esther, and she appoints Mordecai over it all. And everything that he has or had now belongs to Mordecai. It's an incredible twist of events. Continuing on in verse 3 in this chapter, it says this: Esther again pleaded with the king. Falling at his feet and weeping, she begged him to put an end to the evil plan of Haman the Agagite, which he had devised against the Jews. Then the king extended the gold scepter to Esther, and she arose and stood before him. If it pleases the king, she said, and if he regards me with favor and thinks it's the right thing to do, and if he is pleased with me, let an order be written overruling the dispatches of Haman the Agagite devised. The law has been written. The king's signet ring signed the original decree that said that all of the Jews were to be destroyed on that 13th day of the 12th month. That's an important date, so remember that. That date is what was written. And so what Esther is doing is she is going before the king, and this isn't just some small feat, because that law can't be just deleted. Like, this isn't the digital world where you can just like send out a quick email and be like, okay, that one's off and this new one's in. It was already out there. There were preparations being made. And so what Esther is asking the king to do is actually a little bit embarrassing. She's asking the king to kind of a little bit eat crow. That he would kind of just be like, oh, I put this into effect, and now I've got to undo it, and I'm going to do some things to kind of undo it. And so Esther's asking him to humble himself a little bit, and if we look at the king, he is not really used to humbling himself. He's not very good at being humble. He's kind of like, all about me, what I do goes, and I say this, and this happens. And yet he had this thing where he made a lapse in judgment and let Haman put this law out there, and now he has to retract what he said was going to happen. And so Esther's asking him to do something really, really significant, to overturn his original edict to the people, to save her cousin, and to save all of the Jewish people in all of Persia. And in verse 11, this is what we're told. The king's edict granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate the armored men of any nationality or province who might attack them, and their women and children, and to plunder the property of their enemies. Now, if you were with us back when this original law was written, you recognize the language, don't you? See, this new law that Esther is writing, that the king is putting into place, it matches all of the same language. Because what was once, now on this day, you can now kill any Jew that you see or any Jewish person that you want to. You can kill their women and their children. He uses the language, destroy, kill, and annihilate all of the women and children, and you can plunder their estate. And so what this is doing is it's undoing it and giving the Jewish people the same authority that the Persian people had. And says, you are now allowed to assemble and protect yourselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate the armed men of any nationality, of any province, who might attack you and your women and children. And you are allowed to plunder, to steal their property because they're your enemies. Now this might be like, okay, this is natural, because obviously like we're on Team Esther, right? Like we're on like, woo, Esther is the best. Like we are all about Esther, she rocks. But like inside of this story, like what you need to understand is, to put it in common terms today, the Jewish people are in exile. They are refugees in Persia. They are not citizens of Persia. They are Jewish people who are being allowed to live there, and the king has just written into law that the refugees, the non-citizens, can kill the Persian citizens. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States just wrote a law into effect that anyone who is not a natural citizen of America is allowed to kill Americans. That's what's happening in this world. Like inside of our story, the king has just written into law that the people who are non-citizens of their country are allowed to kill the citizens of their country. This is significant. This is really bad PR, in case you're wondering. You see, because the Persians are the ones who are a part of his kingdom. They are the ones who are a part of his lineage. The Jewish people have nothing to do with King Xerxes growing and being known amongst the nations. And what he is saying is I'm going to write this into law so that this happens on that 13th day of the 12th month, that instead of all of the Jews being destroyed, that the Jews are now allowed to defend themselves. That date is super important, 13th day of the 12th month. The original law of Haman is written, and now this new decree has been written to match that same exact law. But why does the king do it? That's a natural question, isn't it? I think that throughout the Bible, whenever we read these stories, we have to find ourselves asking questions as opposed to just like reading it and being like, oh, that's cute, that's cool, and moving on. Why would the king put into law something that would allow people who are not a part of his country to defend themselves and to kill his citizens? I believe that we can find it inside of the original part when Esther is asking for permission. Notice how she asked him. She said, if it pleases the king, if he regards me with favor, if he thinks it's the right thing to do, and if he is pleased with me. Now remember, Esther has been queen for over a decade now. So she has grown in rapport with the king. She has continued to do her queenly duties, and she has continued to rise in power and influence, and she has done the right things. We talked about it a little bit, about how she is a part of the culture, but she is not dictated by the culture, that she is dictated by her calling inside of that culture. And so what we're seeing here is that the king has experienced that and has seen her and has looked on her with favor. He is pleased with her, and it pleases the king to not see his queen, whom he loves, who he sees rise to power, and who he is favored with, to be eradicated and all of her people killed as well. It's important to understand that her favor is so important, that her being a part of the culture is so important in this sense. But the king has written it into law. He's written it in so that all the Jews will be saved. Now, all of the Jews, they come out and they attack. They defend themselves. All of the Persian people are coming out to kill the Jewish people on this 13th day of the 12th month. Because of the king's law, all the Jews are able to defend themselves, and they come out, and it is a bloodbath. Chapter 10, we're not going to get into chapter 10, but if you want to read it, it is the bloodbath scene, okay? That is the part of the movie where everybody's getting killed, and there is arrows and swords and everything happening, and all of Haman's sons, all 10 of his sons, come out because, again, they hate the Jewish people. Their whole family does, and they're like, woohoo, we finally get to go out and kill all these people, and they're kind of crazy and vindictive a little bit, but they go out and they try to do that, and all 10 of Haman's boys are killed. And the Jewish people prevail, they aren't destroyed. This day, this 13th day of the 12th month, where they were supposed to be completely wiped off the planet, they're not destroyed, they're delivered. Instead, they're saved, they're rescued. And Mordecai is raised up to power. He's raised up to more and more and more authority. We find him already with the signet ring, with the robe, with the estate of Haman. And he finds himself with the signet ring on his finger and the robe on his back, that he has now raised up inside of the Persian Empire to number 2 in command. He is now the right hand of the most powerful person on the planet. And the Jewish people have been saved. They've been delivered. It's insane to think about this. Insane to think about what this would look like in our own country. But Esther is the star. All of her people have been saved. She has been saved. All of the Jewish people have been rescued. They've been able to defend themselves. And when you look at the story, when you read about the war, the awesome thing is that when you look at the story of the Persian law, that they're allowed to plunder, to steal all of the gold, all of the silver, all of the homes, everything they can from the Jewish people. The Jewish people have also been given that rule over their enemies. They can also plunder their enemies' things. They can steal all the gold candlesticks, all the silver, all the money, all the couches, all the TVs, everything they can. They can loot their enemies' homes and take it with them. And yet what we find inside of this story is that's not the case. It continually says that they killed this person and that person and they didn't touch the plunder. They killed this person and that person and they didn't steal a thing. They killed this many people, but they didn't take anything. And what I want us to hear inside of that story, inside of that understanding, is that the Persian people are not God's people. The Jewish people are God's people. And so what God's people are saying is that we will defend ourselves, but we will not plunder their goods. because our ways are higher than their ways, that we worship a God whose ways are higher than our ways, and who has called us not to do those kinds of things. And so we are going to defend ourselves, but we are not going to pillage and plunder their goods. Esther is the absolute star in this story. All of her people are singing her praise. But there's that one small detail that's left in the story of Esther, that small little detail. Back in chapter 3, how was the date, the 13th day of the 12th month, decided? Do you remember? Haman cast lots. He threw what's called pur, P-U-R. He basically rolled dice. This was something that he did regularly inside of that day and age and that culture. They would roll dice, and what the dice would say would decide what they were going to do. We also see this inside of the story of Jesus. When Jesus is going to the cross, the Roman soldiers want to decide who is going to get his clothing, and so they cast lots. So they throw pur down to be able to decide who gets what of Jesus' articles of clothing. And so pur has happened, and Haman has used it. He's thrown dice. And they've landed in this place, but this place that they've landed is not a coincidence. It's something that has actually happened. Specifically happened. It lands on that 13th day of the 12th month. That is the date that the Jews will be destroyed. But are the Jews destroyed on that day? No. They're delivered. What once was going to be their demise, their day of destruction, has now become the day of their deliverance. And so this moment that at the beginning they threw pur, they threw dice, at that moment their destruction was sealed. The law was written. And so in this moment, what was supposed to be the most awful day in their lives was supposed to wipe them off the planet because, again, the Persian Empire is so large, it is believed that quite possibly the entire Jewish nation would have been wiped off the planet for good if this law would have gone into effect. That all of the Jewish people would have been killed, and they never would have been able to come to power. They never would have been able to continue to move forward. And so that pur initially was rolled. And it might seem like luck or chance, but it wasn't a coincidence. But out of this event, instead of destruction, deliverance is given. And so what we find at the end of chapter 10 is that there is a celebration that is created, because what was once intended for destruction now has been found to be deliverance for the Jewish people. And the festival of Purim comes to pass. Purim. Destruction has been transitioned, has been reversed to deliverance. Isn't that amazing? Now, if you are somebody who believes in coincidence, I don't believe in coincidence because there's just too much crazy stuff happening for all to be coincidence, because I believe that God is working things out behind the scenes, as I have said 100, if not 1,000 times, that I don't believe in coincidence. And if you want me to confirm it for you, when we put this on the calendar, we set the Esther series up on the calendar. We just put it in there in a good slot. We felt like it was a good space before Easter. And you know what? Purim happened this last week. I know you might think, I'm super smart and I planned it. No way. I didn't even know what Purim was. It was one of those things that I just kind of walked past. I just read through and they celebrated Purim. I should probably know what that is, but I'm not going to learn today. Purim happened this last week. As we were reading chapter 10 and chapter 11 and preparing to put a bow on side of the story of Esther, the Jewish people still to this day are celebrating the day that once was set for their destruction, to celebrate that they were delivered out of the hands of the Persian people. Incredible. Because this is what it says inside of Scripture. It says, therefore these days were called Purim, from the word pur. These days should be remembered and observed in every generation, by every family, and in every province, and in every city. And these days of Purim should never fail to be celebrated by the Jews. They're delivered. The Jewish people are delivered. And year after year after year after decade after generation, they have continued to celebrate what God had done for them. When the world had set destruction on their head, God offered deliverance. Why is it celebrated? They celebrate it because they believe that it is worthy to celebrate, that we were once destined for destruction, but God. But God rescued them. But God redeemed them. But God restored them. But God protected them. But God cared for them. But God looked out for them. They celebrate that what was once meant for destruction now has led to their deliverance. God saved them. And they believe that it is worthy to be celebrated. And I just can't help but think, absolutely, we should celebrate more. I'm awful at celebrating things that should be celebrated, but when I look at this, can you think of anything better to celebrate than the day that you were delivered? The day that you were going to be destroyed, but you have now been delivered? Friends, this is true for Esther, it's true for the Jewish people, and it's true for you, and it's true for me as well. Because the Jews being delivered, their deliverance was not a coincidence. Deliverance is never a coincidence. If we truly believe that God is working things out for our good, that he is working behind the scenes, then there is no such thing as coincidence. And the deliverance of the Jewish people wasn't a coincidence. And your deliverance wasn't a coincidence, and my deliverance wasn't a coincidence. The opportunity that we have to be in a relationship with a loving God, a God that is looking out for us, that is doing things for our good, it's just simply not a coincidence. It can't be. If we believe that God's fingerprints are all over this world and all over our lives, and he's working things out for our good behind the scenes, there can't be coincidences. Because he's working even when we can't see it. And even when we don't feel it, and even when we don't know it, his fingerprints are working in the background. But so oftentimes I find myself saying like, God, I just can't feel you. Where are you? I wish you were here. I wish you would do something. I wish you would just handle this for me. God, where are you? I can't feel you. I wish you were here. I wish you were doing something. We have to understand that God is doing something. He just might not be doing what we want him to. But if we learn anything from the story of Esther, I would imagine that Esther would have loved if God would have delivered the Jewish people long before Haman put out the edict. Long before she had to take her life into her own hands and go before the king and see if he was going to spare her life with the gold scepter or not. I'm sure that Esther was like, it's been a decade, God. Like, what are you doing? Like, aren't you seeing me down here? I'm a Jewish woman. I'm hidden. Nobody knows my nationality, and now my people are going to be destroyed, and I don't really know what you're doing here. Gosh, I wish I could feel you. I wish I could see you. I wish I could know what you're doing. And yet what we understand from this is that God was working behind the scenes for such a time as this. Remember Mordecai's words? God is going to do it with or without you, Esther. Why? Because he's working things out behind the scenes. He is doing what only he can and putting things into motion. Friends, it's been true in the past, and it's true in the present, and it will be true in the future that our God is for us, and he is working things out for our good. And that good may not be the way that we think it should be. But we can trust his heart when we can't trust his fingers. When we can't see his hands, when we can't see him moving, when we can't feel him, we can trust his heart. Friends, deliverance is not a coincidence, period. End of story. And if you're a follower of Jesus, what I want to say to you today is we all have a birthday, right? We all have this day that we were brought onto the earth. We did nothing. But in that day, we were born, and we celebrate that with birthdays. But I want to say, have you ever celebrated the day that you received deliverance from Jesus? Some people call it a spiritual birthday. Do you remember the day? Do you remember that moment where grace broke through on your brokenness? Do you remember that day, that first spark of Jesus lit a flame inside of you? That's worthy to be celebrated. Just like the Jewish people are saying that for generation upon generation, that we will celebrate that once was meant for destruction, now has led to our deliverance, that we are going to celebrate that each and every day. Friends, what I want to say is we need to celebrate the day that we went from destruction to deliverance, because God has done something significant inside of our lives. And if you are still trying to figure out, gosh, I don't know about this Jesus guy, when he finally breaks through, when grace finally makes sense, when mercy finally breaks through, and you say, yes, Jesus, I want to be with you, I want you to write it down on the calendar so that you can celebrate it every year for years and decades and generation, that this was the day that I moved from ultimate destruction into ultimate deliverance. ultimate deliverance. Friends, it's worthy to be celebrated. And I want us to just take a moment and to think back to that moment. If you don't have the day, if you don't know it was July 21st and it was 12 o'clock, put up a calendar and throw a dart at it. Pick a day and say, this day is going to be the day that I'm going to remember that I am no longer destined for destruction, that I am destined for delivery, that I'm destined for heaven, that I'm no longer a citizen of this world, but I'm a citizen of heaven, that I once was destined for hell, and now I'm destined for heaven. Because it's worthy to be celebrated, friends. It was worthy to be celebrated for Esther. And when we see this, it is not just the story of Esther that we see this. This is the story of our God. The story of reversal and redemption is the story of our God. It's not the story of Esther. It's not the story of Joseph. It's not the story of Abraham. It's not the story of Moses. It's the story of our God. I know that because we see it in the story of our God, Jesus, as he took a time to come to the earth to deliver us from our sins. For when we were still sinners, God died for us. It's worthy to be celebrated. Friends, you have been offered deliverance from destruction. I have been offered deliverance from destruction. And it's not just a one-time thing. It's not some prayer that you prayed as a sixth grader, but maybe that was the beginning. And that began a journey for you to walk towards Jesus, to every morning wake up and receive his new mercies each day and say, God, I choose you today. And if you're sitting here today and you're saying, but my past has been dark and dirty, well, what I want to say to you is so has mine. And yet our God has promised to us that no matter how dark and dirty the past, that his salvation is still for you. That deliverance is still for you. That heaven is still for you. That a life of following after Jesus is still for you. And I want to call us to celebrate. Call us to say, Jesus, you're worth it. Because, friends, our deliverance is also what makes it possible for us to offer deliverance to others. To share the good news of who Jesus is and what he's done for us. You're here for a reason. Your deliverance long ago wasn't just a coincidence, and it's not a coincidence that you're sitting here today. I believe that God has been working things out behind the scenes for you to be here, maybe for such a time as this. That he has something for you. You're going to have to stop settling for the table scraps of this world and to come to the table of Jesus and to say, yes, I want to be with you. I want to receive that forgiveness. I want to receive that deliverance. And he's there with open arms, ready for you no matter where you've been, no matter how long it's been since you've been to church, no matter what your past looks like. Jesus doesn't talk about your past. He always talks about your future. So if you've been following Jesus for a while, I hope that today that you will be reminded of the spark of the great gift that you have already received. And if you're on the fence, if you haven't made a decision to follow Jesus, I hope and pray that someday that there will be breakthrough. And on that day, I hope that you will celebrate it without ending. That our God has saved us. Because he's doing something in us and he's doing something through us. It's worthy to be celebrated. Just like Esther, just like Mordecai, we see God's fingerprints all over their story. And we can see his fingerprints all over our stories as well. If we will simply begin to look around, open our eyes, and celebrate the goodness of God all around us. Amen? Let's pray. God, I thank you and I praise you today. I thank you and I praise you for stories like Esther's. God, that's a story that we can look at, we can read, and we can understand that the story of Esther can be the story of Austin as well. Now, the story of Esther is the story of us. That this is who we are. That this is our destiny, that this is our destination, and yet you are a God who comes to us and changes our destination. That you rescue us. And so God, in this moment, I just pray that if there are people in this room who have never decided to follow you, God, I pray that you would move in a way that only you can. God, if we have been following you for a long time and we've drifted away from you, we haven't looked to you, we haven't asked for forgiveness, we have just continued to walk away from you, God, I pray that in this moment that you would recenter our mind's attention and our heart's affection on you. God, I just know that there are things in my life that are not pleasing to you. There are things that I've done in the last week that are not pleasing to you, that are not a part of your plan for me. And so, God, I just pray that you would rescue me from those things, that you'd rescue all of us from those things in our lives. God, and that we would take hold of the wonderful gift that is ours in you. And that gift is deliverance. That gift is delivery. That gift is redemption. It's rescue.